Today it is now 5:40 and we will begin today's public hearing for the Preventing Outages and Enhancing the Resilience of the Electric Grid Formula Grant, also referred to as Section 40101D. Hafaday and good evening. I want to welcome everyone to the public hearing for the Guam Power Authority's application for grid resilience. Thank you all for taking the time to join us this evening. Before we begin tonight's public hearing, let me introduce myself. My name is Lori Tamaning, and I'm a Management Analyst 3 at the Guam Power Authority, and I will be presenting an overview of the Preventing Outages program, the grant requirements, and how these objectives align with the mission of GPA to provide clean, efficient, reliable, and resilient energy to the people of Guam. Joining me today is John Cruz, the Assistant General Manager of Engineering and Technical Services, and he will be here to answer any questions as it pertains to the grant application. This funding opportunity could not have come at a better time. For the past few months, GPA has worked tirelessly to restore power to the people of Guam, knowing all too well that a successful recovery hinges upon timely power restoration. Thanks to the dedication of our linemen, engineers, support staff, and mutual aid crew from the CNMI, Pohnpei, and Snohomish, Washington, and a little over a month after Typhoon Mawar swept through our island, GPA restored power to 95% of our customers, nearly a third of the time it took for the island to recover following Typhoon Pongsongwa. A part of this successful recovery can be attributed to the investments GPA has made since then. 98% of power poles are concrete or steel instead of wood, and nearly 25% of Guam's power customers receive their power through underground lines. While these improvements have contributed significantly to the resiliency of the grid, Typhoon Mawar has shown us that the work must continue. The Building a Better Grid initiative under the U.S. Department of Energy gives communities the opportunity to upgrade their grids, connect more people to clean electricity, and reliably move clean energy to where it's needed most. This public hearing is part of a requirement for the Preventing Outages and Enhancing the Resilience of the Electric Grid Formula Grant, also referred to as Section 40101D. Next slide, please. As part of this public hearing, we will be going over three things: the background on the IIJA Electric Grid Resilience Funding, the Guam Power Authority Climate and Resilience Strategy, and at the end of the presentation, we will open up the floor for discussion and comments from the public. Next slide, please. For a background on the IIJA, or the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, also known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, this law created 60 new U.S. Department of Energy, or DOE, programs to address grid resilience. In particular, for this grant, we will be focusing on Section 40101D, which are formula grants to states and Indian tribes for preventing outages and enhancing the resilience of the electric grid. Guam's annual formula allocation is approximately $871,337 per year for the next 5 years. For this grant cycle, we will be putting in an application for our Year 1 and Year 2 allocations. Next slide, please. Administered through USDOE's new Building a Better Grid initiative, the program's main objective is to improve the resilience of the nation's electric grids against disruptive events. For the purposes of the grant, a disruptive event is defined as an event in which operations of the electric grid are disrupted, preventively shut off, or cannot operate safely due to extreme weather, wildfire, or a natural disaster. It's very clear in the grant that they do make a distinction between resilience and reliability. The focus of this grant is how the system, or how our electric grid, responds to extreme events versus the day-to-day operations of the authority. Next slide, please. There are 4 main goals of this program. The first is to demonstrate measurable improvements in clean energy resiliency to all hazards throughout the nation and mitigate climate-related risk. The second objective is ensuring that at least 40% of the resulting benefits from 40101D investments are delivered to disadvantaged communities. And under the definition of disadvantaged communities, under the Department of Energy, Guam as a whole qualifies. So we will be able to make the argument that any improvement to the electric grid will support the disadvantaged community. The third objective is to invest in modernized grid infrastructure that can enable consumer access to lower cost energy and accommodate increased electrification, increased penetrations of variable renewable energy and distributed energy resources, as well as other evolving system needs over the coming decades. The last objective of this program is to invest in clean energy and decarbonization solutions, particularly to help the authority achieve 50% renewable energy or non-greenhouse gas emission sources by 2030, and ultimately meet our goal of 100% by 2040. Next slide, please. So we do have a few requirements as part of our application. We must submit a program narrative template, and as part of the grant requirement, the program narrative will not list or address specific projects, just overall goals of the authority in order to mitigate hazard risks. We will be submitting the federal forms for grants, the SF-424, the SF-LLL, as well as the environmental questionnaire and pre-award information sheet. And as I stated earlier, a part of this grant requirement is to hold a public hearing so that we can receive comments from the public regarding projects that can help increase the resiliency of the grid. Next slide, please. The following are eligible entities that can submit applications for this grant. They include electric grid operators, electricity storage operators, electric generators, a transmission owner or operator, a distribution provider, or a fuel supplier. As part of the match requirements for this grant, small utilities must match 1/3 of federal grants, and any other utilities, other recipients must match 100% of the federal grant. Based on the definition from DOE, the Guam Power Authority does qualify as a small utility, and so our matching requirement will be 1/3 of the grant. Next slide, please. Some qualified uses of the grant: weatherization technologies and equipment, monitoring and control technologies, the undergrounding of electrical equipment, utility pole management, the relocation of power lines or the reconductoring of power lines with low sagging or advanced conductors, vegetation and fuel load management, the use or construction of distributed energy resources for enhancing system adaptive capacity during disruptive events, including microgrids and battery storage components, adaptive protection technologies, advanced modeling technologies, hardening of power lines, facilities, substations, or other systems from weather events, fire, and other events, the replacement of old overhead conductors and underground cables. A lot of these projects are in the planning stages already for the authority, and we really need to prioritize which projects receive funding under this particular grant or even other grants as well. Next slide, please. A big component of the grant, as well as other grants under the bipartisan infrastructure law, is this approach to equity, in particular the Justice 40 Initiative. The Justice 40 Initiative was created under Executive Order 14008 and establishes a goal that 40% of the overall benefits of this program, as well as many other federal programs, should flow to disadvantaged communities. DOE encourages states to use this funding to, 1, accelerate job growth and job quality, which includes training, attracting, and retaining a skilled workforce, providing workforce opportunities in communities that have lost jobs due to the displacement of fossil energy jobs. Prioritize projects that generate the greatest community benefit, whether rural or urban, in reducing the likelihood and consequences of disruptive events, as well as diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. Reach historically underserved populations, racial minorities, as well as women. Next slide, please. The objectives of the grant are in line with GPA's climate and resilience strategy. As stated earlier, GPA is committed to providing 50% of the island's electric power from renewable or non-greenhouse gas emission sources by 2030, and ultimately 100% by 2040. Outlining our goal, we will have drafted and implemented the GPA Clean Energy Master Plan, also known as the CEMP, which is a comprehensive plan for transitioning Guam from fossil fuels to renewable energy and non-greenhouse gas emissions electric energy supply. Next slide, please. This supports initial investments and solutions that make energy systems resilient. GPA has undertaken already significant system hardening initiatives to include power plants that are constructed with concrete or prefabricated structures to withstand 180 miles per hour winds. Vital power transmission lines are underground, with 60% of critical system loads served through underground infrastructure. Over 87% of GPA's wood poles have been replaced with concrete poles that can also withstand 180 miles per hour wind speeds. And we continue our Village Underground Hybrid System initiative to place secondary lines underground, and we are currently over 20% completed with this project. Next slide, please. So in particular, Section 40101D grid resilience activities could potentially include utility pole upkeep and removal of trees and other vegetation. As I stated earlier, the undergrounding of electrical equipment, the relocation or reconductoring of power lines, improvements to make our grid resistant to extreme weather, implementing monitoring controls and advanced modeling for real-time situational awareness, and integrating distributed energy resources like microgrids and energy storage. And a lot of these initiatives are in the planning stage, and in fact, the last section where we integrate distributed energy resources through microgrids and batteries, we've already planned to do that at Ukudu Power Plant, but we would like to expand these technologies throughout Guam to ensure that we are reliable and resilient against any future natural disasters. Next slide, please. The following are classified as ineligible projects under the grant. Under the grant funding, we are not allowed to construct a new electric generating facility or large-scale battery storage facility that is not used for enhancing system adaptive capacity during disruptive events, and projects pertaining to cybersecurity are also ineligible. Next slide, please. So as part of our draft program narratives, we have identified 3 objectives that we would like to meet for our grant application. The objective 1 is to improve grid resilience. This involves developing a planning framework to address all hazards, including future climate implications for preventing outages and enhancing the resilience of the electric grid. Our second objective is to support Guam's grid workforce in investing in projects that would increase and support the skilled workforce within Guam by demonstrating standards and protections, professional development, and training opportunities. Our third objective is to promote grid equity and invest in modernization of the grid infrastructure and enabling consumer access to lower cost energy while investing in clean energy solutions that align with the Justice 40 initiative. Next slide, please. As part of our draft evaluation criteria in prioritizing the Guam Power Authority's projects for this grant opportunity, we will be prioritizing projects that will generate the greatest community benefit in reducing the likelihood and consequences of disruptive events. Next slide, please. And while the grant program narrative really is for overarching themes rather than specific projects, I know through the typhoon there has been an increase in demand for underground projects, and so one of our considerations would be to underground our transmission lines as well as our lines connecting to our GWA water wells and WSD wells. As you can see on the map, the purple lines are potential. Are potential new transmission line underground. The purple lines would be our potential new underground transmission line projects that are currently in the planning stages. The blue lines are the lines that connect to two GWA water wells and WSDs. Once again, these are in the planning stages. Work has not begun on them yet, but they are in consideration for the purposes of this grant. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you. We will open the floor to questions and comments from the public. So we will also, if to the listening audience, if you have any questions or comments, you may email me. Once again, my name is Lori Tumaning, and my email is ltumaning@gpagwa.com.
Thanks very much.
Okay. Yes.
Thank you very
you.
much for attending the public hearing.
Yes. Thank you.